You're listening to the Journey podcast. Can the darkest moments of our lives become our greatest opportunities for growth and transformation? Listen to today's episode to find out how one man turned his adversity into a journey of self-discovery and healing. This episode contains strong language and adult subject matter, and listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Journey Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Overcoming massive failure and challenges is a process that requires courage, resilience, and perseverance. It's about learning from past mistakes and failures and using them as a source of strength and motivation to move forward. Our guest, who went from being a cop to being incarcerated, shares his personal journey of rebuilding his life after overcoming massive failure and challenges. In this episode, we explore the topic of overcoming massive failure and challenges and its potential for personal growth and transformation. Our guest shares his insights and experiences with this process, providing tips and strategies for building resilience and staying committed to personal growth. We discuss the importance of self-awareness, self-compassion, and building a support system, as well as the challenges and opportunities of rebuilding life after a major setback. Joe Kelley, former college athlete and Massachusetts cop turned prison inmate, released a tell-all book that doubles as a practical guide for overcoming massive failure and challenges. Sharing what it took to go from disgraced hometown hero and addicted prison inmate number MSA 0684541 to nationally celebrated expert and successful family man, Joe offers hope to anyone who has ever been so far down they fear they don't have what it takes to rebuild. His book, Badge Bars to Beyond, reveals the devastating hold drugs can have over a person's life, as well as how Joe survived prison, relapsed, and rebuilt his life to be better than before. Joe openly shares his failures as a man, husband, and law enforcement officer, as well as the challenges he has overcome and the challenges he's still working through today. As a certified trainer in NLP and life coaching, Joe brings his clients a wealth of knowledge and expertise to help them overcome obstacles in their day-to-day work and personal relationships. Joe has real-life experience in surviving and thriving regardless of circumstances and helps his clients experience personal transformation that helps them make more money and live better in every way. Here is my interview with Joe Kelley. Hi, Joe. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because overcoming failure and challenges is such an interesting space for holistic healing. So welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm glad that we get to talk again after the summit also. And do you want to share a little bit about yourself and your story?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice to be back on with you as well. So my story, I'm a kid from Massachusetts, or I was a kid. I'm now 48 years old. So, I grew up in Massachusetts, a very blue collar state. I was taught at a young age, union job and benefits. That's kind of where I came from. That was the ultimate goal. But I could remember, as far as I can imagine, of the field or career that I wanted to work in, and that was law enforcement. Something about my whole family are all first responders. They're all firemen, and I was a police officer, go figure. I took a left instead of a right. But growing up, I didn't come from much. I worked very hard. I was athletically gifted, so it paid for, college, my whole college degrees and everything else on a football and baseball scholarship. I got out of college. I actually married my college sweetheart, so to speak. My first job I ever got was working for DSS, which is now DCF, Department of Social Services was back then. Now it's Department of Children and Family. I was an adolescence caseworker for truancy for young kids. So a young guy, knowing all that stuff, being able to speak on their level. And I love that job. But probably 8 months into that job, I got the call because I was taking all types of police exams and I got accepted to go to the police academy. Prior to going to the police academy, I had to have surgery on my left knee for all the wear and tear of all the athletics I played over the years. It never got hurt playing, but it seemed after I got done playing, all those like knickknacks. And when I took that surgery at the time, life was good on the verge of becoming a police officer, my dream job for me, my entire life. And, I had the surgery. They gave me a bottle of Percocet, and they said, here, take this for the pain. I took that stuff for the pain and, I was back to work. But they also said 7 years later, I'd probably need that same surgery. And fast forward 7 years later, and I think it was actually 8 years later, a lot in my life had changed in terms of where I was and who I was. Who I was, was a high ranking police officer. I was now implemented the K9 unit. I went up through the ranks very quickly. I was on the emergency response team. And that blue collar state of mentality being from Massachusetts, I lived in my uniform to provide for my family. That's what I knew, take care of my family. I had two young daughters during that time as well. And in doing that, my marriage suffered, because I was at work all the time and, not spending, me and my wife had kind of grown apart. And, obviously would bring in two children into the mix. That was a lot too, especially when I'm working nights, taking care of the kids during the day, and then going back to work. And that was kind of my life. But I also internally, I was going through a lot because, even though I wanted to be a police officer my whole life and all I saw as a young kid was this authority figure, got to use this athleticism, I saw all the good stuff. You know what I mean? I didn't really see all the stuff that came with it. And what comes with it is, being a high ranking police officer in emergency response team, I saw things, the worst of the worst in terms of, regular police officers, they see a lot of things, but being on the emergency response team, you're brought in for the real critical
Mhm.
situations. That started to have an effect on me. And it had an effect on me internally because I had two young kids at the time. And I'm talking about, even being a police officer, going to accidents and seeing fatalities with young kids, crib deaths, regardless of what it is, but stuff that really used to affect me. And the problem is that a police officer, you're taught to give the help, not ask for the help. And that's ingrained in you. And for many different reasons, one of them is you don't want to seem weak or can't do your job and you want to hold some command presence, this and that. And you're there for a lot of other people. Secondly, it's you don't want that stigma against you of having those stigmas. When it comes to a promotion or anything else. So in terms of going up the ranks. So what I did was, a lot of it affected me, but I didn't think that it affected me the way that it ultimately affected me. I thought that I can take this, I'll just, keep it inside. I'm fine. I'm very hardcore, but subconsciously it was coming out in a lot of different ways. It was coming out with my behavior at home. In terms of being very set back, not communicating a lot, not being involved a lot, not talking a lot. My mental health, was starting to decline a little bit in terms of allowing the job, to affect me as a person, which entailed to affect me in my home life and my relationships with everybody that I knew and speed that up, not that that wasn't bad enough. I got hurt wrestling with, somebody on a call. And it was around that time that I had to have surgery again because they had said 7 or 8 years later. And I had to go out, to have surgery again because I hurt myself. And when I went out, I've never been the type of person to sit on a couch and just lay back and heal or anything else. I've always been very active within my life.
Mhm.
So when I went out, they gave me another set of pain pills that were higher, dosage and stuff. And what I had found when I took that was it had numbed all that emotion that was going on inside. And I was the type of guy, and I didn't realize this at first, but looking back, I realized it. I started taking these pills more and more to go do the things that I wanted to do, regardless of the physical pain. And when the physical pain was gone, I started using it for the emotional stuff that I was going through. My marriage was falling apart. I had distanced myself from a lot of people that I had known. It kind of numbed me from things going on at work, whether that's things I saw or just the stress of different situations that I was in, or even as little bit as dealing with a lieutenant that was riding your butt about paperwork. You mean it just really took over my life. And every time I went back into the doctor, they'd give me another set of pills, you know what I mean, without even asking, because I'd be like, I'm still in a little bit of pain. And of course I'm in pain. I'm not sitting down and relaxing. I'm continue to move forward. And then it got to a point where, when those pills were gone, I was like father of the year while I was on them. And I was very like changed my whole demeanor, like I could do anything. But when I didn't have something, and the pills ran out, oh my, did those emotions come back tenfold? Did not only did the emotions come back tenfold, but I started to feel like physically the worst I've ever felt in my life. I knew nothing about addiction. I knew nothing about withdrawal back then. I knew nothing about any of that. And I started to feel that in my mind, I correlated. I'm like, oh, I need that stuff, to maintain. So I would go back to the doctor and say, hey, I'm still in pain. I need something out. And because of my status and who I was within the community, they didn't question me. They gave it to me left and right until I was red flagged by the insurance companies from getting it from like three different doctors. And this was back in, 2006 to 2009. And what happened is when I got red flagged, I couldn't, regardless of who wrote me a script to go get more, I couldn't get any because they wouldn't give them to me because they said you already had some. So in my mind, the next best thing is I'm going to get it from people that I know, people that I went to high school with because I worked the town over from where I grew up, being the big athletic, football star and everything else. And this is where the lying and the dishonesty started to play in. And still red flags popping up and me not seeing anything but the fact that I need to go to work, I need to do my job. I can't feel the way I'm feeling, because when they gave me those pills back then, they didn't say, hey, be careful with these things. You could become addictive or anything that came with it. I mean, for me, it was trial and error, you know. When I got started getting them off people, obviously insurance is not paying for it. I had to pay for it. And these are people that I had known from high school. I wasn't worried about what they were going to do. I'd come with that story. I'm in such pain. I'd make up some excuse. They give them to me at first, but then when I keep coming back, they're like, these things aren't free. So I started taking money out of my account, which I shared with my wife, to pay for these things. And they were expensive, but I felt I needed them. And and the dishonesty keeps going and going and going, my wife would be like, what'd you take money out for? And I would be like, I needed a new boots or a holster or a bulletproof vest. And all this stuff costs, a lot of money. But here's the thing, I was lying to everyone but myself because in 2 months, I'm still walking around in the same old shit I was wearing before. You know what I mean? But I'm believing my own stuff. It got to the point where my ex-wife, she is now my ex-wife, took my debit card and was like, yeah, I need to, because she didn't have an idea. She goes, well, you're going to the bank too much. Let me have your debit card. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. And here's where my addiction took me. It took me to a point where I can remember needing something in order to maintain. This is when me getting high it was to maintain, right? My life and how I responded and how I acted. I can remember shutting off the cruiser, rolling it into my driveway, going into our bedroom. And this isn't a story I'm proud of, but it's real. Crawling across, turning my radio down, crawling across the floor to her purse to take out a debit card, do the same thing all the way back, go to the bank, take out money, and do the same thing to replace the credit card. And then her call asked me a week later, did you take out money? And my answer was, how can I take out money? I work midnights. I don't have a card. Must be a bank error. You mean? And there's the sick, twisted mentality is me stopping from getting caught and buying myself time so I can come up with some other type of lie or manipulation factor, right? And there was a lot of that along the way. And you fast forward, I get to the point where, it got worse and worse, and somebody had got caught up on some charges and said, I know somebody's getting some of this and some of that. And the chief sat me down, who was one of my good friends, and he said, hey, Joe, there's been some discussion that there's some things going on. If you need some help, we'll get you some help, right? But here's the thing, with my mental state of mind back then, the fear, the guilt, and everything else of losing everything that I've worked up to that point, I was afraid of losing. Little did I know that eventually I lose it all anyway, right? But I said to him, when he said that, we'll get you some help. The only thing that I heard was tell me everything you know so I can fire your ass. That's what I heard. Not what he said, what I heard, right? Fast forward, I ended up, the wheels fell off the bus. I ended up resigning, and I'd say when we think of resigning, we always think it's on our own. It wasn't on my own. I was forcefully resigned to not bring any attention or anything else. And here, they even took it a step further was, hey, get under control because the chief was a good friend of mine. Get it under control. We'll get you a job somewhere else. Just go do whatever the hell it is that you got to do. But here's my mental state of mind is when that happened, you want to talk, oh, my wife left me. She emptied our bank accounts. Everyone that I actually associated with my entire life around law enforcement, whether they liked me or not, distanced themselves from me because they didn't want to be a part of whatever was going on. I was literally and utterly alone, like bear. My parents weren't speaking to me except for my mother, who was a huge enabler, right? But I'll get into that afterwards. Everything that I had known had just washed away, it seemed like overnight. And it made me angry because as men, right, as men and as a man, I don't show weakness, or way back then, I didn't show weakness. I was brought up that a lot of us men mask, our sadness, our guilt, our shame with anger. And I got angry. And I got angry that everything I've worked for and people walked away, and all my expectations on everyone around me, which usually lead to premeditated resentments anyway, expectations, right? And I went on a run. I walked the first part of it. I went into a detox. And the first time the lady said to me, I got talked into going by one of the other officers who brought me down after I had left the job. She goes, you sure you want to be here? And that's the last words I needed to hear because she knew who I was. And I literally said to her, it doesn't matter. That job is over. It's gone. So I went in there and all that anger and, feeling alone and the hole in my heart, I went in there and what did I do? I got angry and I said, I'll show you. So I ended up going into a detox, never being allowed to talk about anything that was going on with me internally because of who I was and because of how I was. I felt safety in there talking with other people. For the first time in my life, I was around people that had the same issue as me, that were struggling with the same thing. And little do you know, all I wanted at that time, because everyone had exited, I wanted to feel loved. I wanted to feel accepted. I needed somebody to tell me it was going to be okay. I'm there for you. I understand what you're going through, this and that. And what do you know? There was a young girl in there, not young girl, but girl a little bit younger than me in there that says, I got you. And let me tell you what was probably the worst decision of my life because she was a little further down the road with addiction than I was. And I just wanted that acceptance. I want everything in my life had gone away. And I was just like, oh, hugged on to her because that's what I needed. She probably needed the financial security, even though I didn't have much left, because my wife had taken it all. And it got ugly about a 6-month run where, I did everything from pull out my retirement to spending that money, to you name it, I did it. I'm not proud of it until I got caught. I got caught. I got charged with trafficking because of the amount of pills that I had on me. And I was warned plenty of times during those 6 months. It was like literally, I didn't want to wake up the next day. I just didn't have, in me to do it myself. Every day was a rat race for me. It was waking up, dealing with my name across the front page of the paper because I got arrested because of who I was in the community, the embarrassment I brought to my family, the embarrassment that I brought to myself. You got to play it back. I'm the big fish in the little pond. The athletic star returns home, high ranking police officer. And now, for the first time in my life, I've made some poor decisions, and this is where I'm at. And it's plastered through the whole entire paper. And my will to live went out the window. Some of the things that I did to get what I needed, they were all nonviolent. I never hurt anybody physically, but they were all nonviolent criminal offenses. I ended up getting sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. Now imagine a police officer walking into prison, right?
Yeah.
He had to send me like 4 counties over. You know, I ended up going to prison, and I'll let you ask some questions too. I ended up going to prison. I did 19 months of incarceration. I got out. I was paroled. But while I was in there, after probably a month of not being able to manipulate my way out or figure out nobody was coming to bail me out, that's for damn sure. Nobody was talking to me. I finally had to say to myself, I had some clarity. Like, I was like, how did I end up here? Right? I'm sitting in there. How did I end up here? You know? And then I had some clarity in there as well. When I knew I couldn't get out and I had to do the time, it's my perspective changes. I started reading books about other people that were, maybe not police officers, but other people that have had the fall from grace, so to speak, and how they rebuilt their lives and went on and used it to better the lives of other people, but also, to be successful. I needed to relate with some story like that because it was when I first read something like that, it's when it lit that spark inside of me again, where I started to say, instead of why me, I started saying, why not me? Right? That was the start of it. It was maybe I'm going through this so my kids never have to go through it. Maybe, I was just looking for anything positive to hang on to drive me to go forward. And when I got out, that was the toughest part of my life was getting out because in the state of Massachusetts, they take your driver's license. Yeah, I'm now a convicted felon. The stigma of that with society in terms of jobs. I couldn't use any of my college degrees. Definitely wasn't going back to law enforcement. So what was I going to do with myself? I was lost with no purpose, until I grabbed a job working as a tech at a detox where I was trying to help out other people because I needed a job for the parole. So I did it. But what happened was I really loved it. And because of all my college credits and everything else, I became a counselor, at a detox. And I did that for about a year. In doing that, I still had a lot of changing to do because it wasn't, I always had that mindset of my life is never going to get better than this. Like I made such huge mistakes that my life, I couldn't see past it, and I couldn't see myself working for $15 an hour the rest of my life. It was like, so that spark was starting to dim again. And I realized because of who I was and my status in the community in the past and my fall from grace, I could never escape my past in the state of Massachusetts. And they say that like geographical locations, don't change anything because you take yourself with you. But with my situation, I needed to get away. I needed to make a decision. And what actually catapulted that decision is the death of my cousin. I was sober for about 2 years, not taking any pills or anything like that after incarceration and working at a detox, this and that. And I was on a boat with my cousin who passed away in front of me because the boat was anchored and got moved along. And we were both in the water, treading water, and his wife couldn't get the boat started. And he went under. And for I don't know how I survived. They got it started and came over and grabbed me. But after that event, I started using again. Like I couldn't deal with it. This was like my best friend growing up. It was my cousin. It was like a brother. And after like a week of using, I'm like, what am I doing? I knew a friend in Florida, called him up, and he's like, come down here. And I said, I just took a suitcase with a very small amount of things that I had at that time in my life, and I went. It was probably the best decision of my life because the bonus part of the story is, that was all and there's obviously a lot of stuff in between and questions. I met my now wife. She was a doctor, in psychology, and sometimes God does for you what you can't do for yourself. I came down, I worked on myself for a year, and I felt stronger than I ever had in terms of emotionally. I didn't have the finances. I still owed the IRS. I still had to pay child support. I had all that. That was a mess. But I felt good about who I was and what my direction was. And when I met her, she was into a lot of different modalities, like meditation and yoga and NLP and hypnosis. And she taught this stuff. And at first, my old ego would never have allowed me to do any of those things,
Mm.
right? But this is why I say when God enters your life is because I was so physically attracted to her and just wanted to get to know her on a more personal level to find out what she was about and everything else. I did some of those things with her to be a part of her little circle. Wow, what a change it had on me, specifically NLP. NLP is called neuro linguistic programming. It's a fancy word for the roadmap to the mind,
Mhm.
communication. It's a process that you don't do to somebody, you do with. Do you know what I mean? And when I went through NLP, I got hooked. I became a practitioner. Then I wanted more. I became a master practitioner. And then I became a trainer, right? And when I went through that, my whole life changed. And obviously, within 6 months, I ended up proposing to her and we got married, and we've been married for 9 years, 3 kids later with her. And my life is second to none now. I've opened up as a look at my story of who I was, where I went, and where I am today. I built 2 multi-million-dollar companies. I left that a year and a half ago. Me and my wife combined our talents, and we have our company now. We have 3 different companies. I love what I do. I'm passionate. I mean, I make more money than I ever made in my life doing what I love. I have every police department from, the East Coast to the West Coast that asked me to come and speak. I just wrote a book called Badge Bars to Beyond, my first ever book that I've written. My story, but it's more the hero's journey, but not a story of war stories. More, it's a book of tangible things that you can take to improve your life now. And it's not even based on addiction. Yeah, that's part of my story, but it's for the reluctant divorcee, the bankrupt professional, anyone that has to deal with obstacles or challenges in their life and how to move the needle and to get out of it.
Mhm.
know, Today, my life, I've designed it with my wife, and we love what we do. And now, not only do I speak around the country, I'm the union liaison over 80,000 members for CWA and American Airlines in terms of all their mental health, all their substance use disorder. We do trainings for team building. And my life today is designed where, yes, I can relate and work with people that are in recovery or substance use disorder, but I don't pigeonhole myself to that area, even though I have experience in that area, personal experience. We work with a lot of high executive CEOs and different businesses, whether small, medium, or large, on improving their bottom line, their revenue through the NLP sales model. It's communication. I work with a lot of individual people on a coaching aspect in terms of improving what area of life they're looking to improve. And I'm constantly looking for ways to better myself, because I don't just say that I do that. I have a business coach myself. I have a personal coach myself. I think it's the most underutilized service out there because I think one of the things is in order to get it, you need to have humility. And humility is the ability to ask another for help. Do you know what I mean? And that doesn't mean that I'm any better than you. What it does mean is probably I'm stronger in certain areas that you're looking to improve. You know what I mean? And I love that. I love remaining vulnerable. I just got a call probably 10 minutes before we got on here from the Fort Lauderdale Police Department asking me to come in to speak to their officers. I get so excited about that stuff. In those places when I was going through my madness and all that stuff, I walk into my old police department. My best friend is now the deputy chief. Everyone I went to the police academy are either lieutenants and chiefs around the country. So I tap into them. And even though they had, kind of went away way back then, even people that talked ill of me back then because they didn't understand or this and that are now calling me because they have loved ones that are going through certain things and they're looking for advice. I went back to Massachusetts 2 years ago and held a huge event, called Breaking the Chains. And we brought every resource me and my wife have, to the state of Massachusetts from around the country with tangible resources that they could walk away, not just awareness. Awareness is great, But when you can bring tangible resources that people can implement in their life now, that makes all the difference. And I was very proud of that because they wouldn't necessarily have had the ability to have those people come down. You mean one of my good friends, Chris Nyland from the Montreal Canadiens, he's retired. You mean he has his Knuckles podcast, works with the NHL. I mean, I've had the benefit of working with a very successful people in all different walks of life. I always say I got friends with doctorates, I got friends with LLCs, I got friends with huge amounts of money coming in businesses, and I got friends with felonies, and I learned from them all.
Yeah.
you know, so
Wonderful.
yeah, that's the high level view of my whole story. If you have some questions that you want to tap in, now me and my wife own Obtaining Mastery, which is we hold daily events, and Om Center for Wellness, which is a holistic wellness center with cryotherapy, neurofeedback. So we tap into people's, brains and look at their brain to see how it's functioning to improve their brain function holistically. Nothing like we're not going into your brain. We cap it, we look at QEGs, and we implement mind, body, and soul. But one of my big things is we have a Maximize Your Mindset that's coming up. It's May 19th to the 21st is our next one. It's my favorite event because what we do is we bring people in. It's a 3-day event where we work on, goals and mindset and perspective. And we give you a little bit of all the modalities that we give you a taste of it to see if it's something that you're interested in moving the needle and going forward. We put in goals, we talk about blocks, limited beliefs, anchoring, different states, how to release anger. There's so much. I could go on for days, but I love what I do today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and for being so honest and vulnerable and talking about all the bits that are difficult and the bits that were very hard for you to go through. I would imagine that there are a few people that listen to the podcast that can relate. They've overcome their own challenges, or maybe they are facing challenges at the moment or facing addictions that they're trying to recover from. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I can hear your passion in what you do today. So I love that because I know you and your wife have the most amazing setup, and the work that you do has touched so many lives and changed lives for so many people. So thank you for what you both do. And one thing that I am curious about is, how did you manage the mental and the emotional impact of this journey that you went through, especially when you went on that run for 6 months and then you ended up being incarcerated? How did you manage all of that? There must have been so many things that came up after you couldn't numb that anymore with pills. So how did you go through that?
It was a very ugly time in my life back then. So let me get into that mental state where I was. How I numbed it was with nothing good. When the medication wasn't around for me to get, I was never a big drinker, but then I would turn to that and that didn't work. And then I would turn to women, and then that wouldn't work. And then I would turn to working out and then that wouldn't work. I was always looking for outside things to fill the hole that was inside of me until I realized and it came to my awareness that it was a solo job that I needed to heal from the inside out. Because that thought process made me very codependent on a lot of different things. And it worked for a minute until it didn't work. And it really messed me up, mentally, because I just didn't know how to escape until I started to work on me, until I started to work on. So part of the process was realizing my patterns of behavior. And back then, when I was trying to fill that hole, whether I couldn't use drugs, I couldn't use alcohol because that stuff just wasn't working. It led me to prison. My next thing, and being bluntly honest, was I'd be in one relationship right after the another. Do you know what I mean? And I would use that to fill the hole until it didn't work. And then I realized the pattern of behavior that I was going through women's lives like a tornado. You know what I mean? And it was me, regardless of what they brought on. I'm sure it wasn't, but then it was the gym. Then I'd work out constantly. You mean? And that would work for a minute until it didn't. So I went through the whole process, and this is why I share a lot of it in my book as well, is so that people, I love people to read it, but more importantly, I love them to learn from it because people don't have to go through everything that I went through. I mean, you can learn from reading, people that want to be vulnerable about their situations, and even if it's different age, different sex, or anything else, you can always learn from somebody. Take what you need and leave what you don't. Do you know what I mean? That's my motto. And I love that old saying as well. And I think I told you this before. It's one of my favorite is somebody took the same situation you're complaining about and they won with it. That is empowering to me. It's so empowering. And I always mess up this line, but I love the analogy of it is way back in the day, they said, what was it? Yeah, I'm going to mess it up, but you'll get my analogy. The 6 minute mile was impossible until it was broken. And then once it was broken, how many more times was it broken? You mean? So that's the type of thing that I fed off of was seeing most of the people in this world, even that I read about, most of the most successful people in this world don't have a formal education. You mean? They come from circumstances that they had to rise above or mistakes or obstacles. You mean? And today, I would say, back then, and this would have never came out of my mouth, but I would never erase anything that happened to me because if I erase my past, I erase me. I like who I am today. You mean I like the work that I do? And it's unfortunate that I had to go through those things and I made some very, very poor choices. I own them. I take responsibility for them. I've made amends on the ones that allowed me to make amends on them. I'm not perfect. But the one thing that I do is continue to grow and continue to better myself, mentally, physically, and spiritually. I ask a lot of people, I know from my time today, one of my two biggest values are, God and family. I'm a real family man. And I'll tell you what, I had a resurrection with God after the stuff I went through. I shouldn't be sitting here. The stuff that I've gone through in my life and some of the poor decisions I've made, I should not be sitting here, where I am. I should either be dead or I shouldn't be having the type of success that I'm having through the decisions I've made in my past. Here's what I like to say is never allow your mistakes to define who you are. Rather be defined in your perseverance and overcoming. And I had every excuse in the book. And most people have every excuse in the book that they can throw at you, unless they have a secondary gain that they're getting from that. For me, I love my life. I hate what I went through, but now I can't change the past. So what I do is I open up, I be vulnerable about it, I accept it, and I use it to help other people.
Yeah. And what an amazing job you do with that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It is true that you went through extremely difficult circumstances, and maybe you are wondering sometimes why you are still here, how you are still here. But I do see also all the lives that you have touched, and especially with your story and because of what you went through. So I do believe there is some purpose always behind what happens. And you are able to help so many people now because you have seen that other side and you've seen that dark side and what it can do and what it takes to get out of there. So, yeah,
It was
amazing.
funny. I was at a mastermind because I truly believe that old comment of you are who you surround yourself with. Me and my wife are a part of some very exclusive masterminds, specifically one out in San Diego. And when we had to stand up and introduce ourselves, I'm looking around the room. You have all these IT people, you have all these big business guys. Like you ask, hey, what time's your flight? They're like, wheels up at 5. I'm like, what is that? Right. But I had raised my hand and I had said, I'm probably in front of all of them. I go, I'm probably the least likely to succeed in this entire room, or was voted the least likely to succeed in this entire room. I go, but you know what? I relish in it. And the reason why I relish in it is because many of the lives that I've come across through my own personal experience, regardless of, finances or anything else, most people are very good in like a couple areas of their life. Yeah, I mean? But then the other parts of their lives are suffering, and how I said is I go, it's for us, for me and my wife, what we do is we build a container of success for individuals. I'm not going to, do your funnels. I'm not going to build your background, this or that. But what I'm going to do is make you a better human being. You know what I mean? So you can be there and be balanced within your life and be happy, because I think the purpose of life is to be happy. We got one life, and most people are unaligned with where they're at in their life. If I ask people, what are your values? Most people knock off three different values or four or five. And then I'll say, okay, now I want you to write down on another piece of paper, where do you spend most of your time? Most people, when they do that, as simple as it is like an aha moment, or like, wow. Or maybe they already know. It's they spend no time in what they prioritize the most. You mean in terms of their value system. And when you're out of alignment with who you are as a person, because maybe you're chasing the almighty dollar or whatever it may be, it causes friction internally,
Yeah,
whether that's
absolutely.
within your mind or, a sickness that's going on in you, and most people say all the time that, that have children, I know I have, is I do anything for my kids. I would take a bullet, jump in front of a train, whatever, for my kids. But then you'll see them eating McDonald's 3 times a day or eating like crap. You're not going to be around long enough to be there to take a bullet or jump in front of a train for your kids. So health, nutrition, self-care, like the lack of self-care that I see going on in this world, it's tremendous. So
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I'm also wondering about, you talked about the secrets and the lies that were going on. So,
mhm.
is there something to be said for people who are facing challenges and who are struggling to speak up, to be honest about what they're experiencing, to really break through that ego that might be holding them back and to speak to someone, to connect with someone? Is there something to be said for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think going back, all of us who ever go through challenges in life, maybe it's our guilt, maybe our shame, how we brought up, whatever it may be, we always think that we're so unique. You know what I mean? Because here's the problem. Most people don't share. You ever go on Facebook or this or that, you'll get some people that just dump all kinds of stuff on there, but most people don't share about their difficulties or what they have to overcome or what they're going through. You always see like the highlight reels, you know what I mean, of their life so fancy and beautiful or this and that, but you don't see the back end story, so a lot of people are not openly talk about their challenges in life because they're afraid of, it being used against them in some different way to hinder where they're trying to get to. For me, like I said, my stuff was front page of the paper. Maybe that's why I'm so open and vulnerable, right?
You didn't
I
get a
mean,
choice.
yeah, but it's also, I've continued to be open and vulnerable with my life even after that. Because I think it's important that and I'm not talking substance abuse, I'm talking overcoming obstacles. If I can recover loudly from whatever obstacle or challenge that I'm dealing with in life, maybe if I'm loud enough to talk about it and speak about it and not worry about what other people think, that maybe it's going to help somebody out there who's dying silently.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? And
absolutely.
that's what I say at a lot of different masterminds is, yeah, hey, I love them. I love the fact you made 5 million last year. You mean, that's great, but I want to hear some of the mistakes that happened and the obstacles you had to overcome, because I personally learned more from that.
Mm.
Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And
And
I always say, Petra, there's no failure. There's only feedback, and it's how you apply that feedback. You
yeah,
know?
exactly. That's why I'm so glad to have you on today, because I think even this conversation highlights so many things that people don't very often talk about. They keep to themselves. And we're having a very honest conversation about what we should be doing. So, yeah,
I love the uniqueness piece, because even I thought I was so unique. There's plenty of police officers out there that have struggled that hopefully see this podcast and understand. Reach out to me. I love to talk. I mean, I love to say, if no one's told you they love you today, I love you. You know what I mean? I love, the fact that I had some of the experiences in my life, because it changed me, internally in terms of who I am. I mean, even with NLP, like, oh my God, like NLP changed my life. It made me a better father. It made me a better son, made me a better husband, it made me a better human being to be able to communicate effectively with people. I mean, and not only that, to use my past, whether it was my law enforcement training, whether it was my personal hardships, whether it's my experience, and be able to word that in order to help somebody else and understand what they're going through, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, I do want to touch really briefly on the fact that you said your mother was an enabler. Let's unpack that a little bit, just briefly, because I think there are people in our lives that really, it comes from a place of love. They really are trying their best,
Sure.
but it ends up enabling us in certain ways and maybe making the situation worse. So, what happened there for you?
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of people, but in my situation, my father, back then was the total opposite. Shut me down, shut me off, still loved me, obviously. But I mean, we have to realize that people can only do what they can do with the resources that they have and what they know. You know what I mean? So not trying to hurt, trying to help. And my mother and my father are a great example of two different spectrums. My dad thought he was helping me by shutting me down and casting me out. My mom thought she was helping me by giving me the shirt off her back, or, not wanting to put in any consequences or anything else, and always there to save me from whatever. And a perfect example is my mother, is when in the early days prior to me going to detox or anything really bad happening, people knew something was up, and my ex-wife and her father and my dad and everyone was trying to plan an intervention at my house.
Mhm.
And my mother was part of it. But my mother actually called me on the phone, said, "You don't want to come here. They're all against you." Right. And I had called my ex wife and I'm like, "You get them all out of my house now." You mean, but that's the thing. And even when I was struggling or I needed some money, obviously it was for drugs. And I would lie to my mother and manipulate her and say, "Oh, I need to eat," or something like that. And she'd give it to me with no stipulation. Even if she didn't have it, she'd find a way to give it to me. But she was doing the best that she could do with the resources she had. She's the type of lady that would give me the shirt off her back. Do you mean it if I had asked? And my dad, was doing what he thought was right. I tell a lot of people out there that, families that contact me is they got like their son who's still living in their house. They're still paying the note. They're still doing this. And I go, "You're loving your kid to death." I go, "Or your husband or your wife or whoever it may be." I go, "Because it's like me when I was growing up. At 3 years old, I took a candy bar from a store. My grandmother embarrassed me and took me back. And the lady was like, "I'm going to call the police next time." It scared me. At 3 years, I was scared, right? But I never did it again, you know? But if that didn't happen, how many times more as I got to be 4 or 5 would I just walked in and grabbed a candy bar and walked out if there were no consequences for my actions? Do you know what I mean? So I tell a lot of people I get it's a struggle. And I also realize that I can only help those that are willing to help
Mhm.
themselves. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. It's
Well,
a very interesting insight and what happens sort of in the background when you're struggling with things and how different family members and friends try to help or don't help, are helpful or actually get in the way of sometimes the recovery. So, yeah, thank you. Now, you want to go over some of your programs and services on how listeners could connect with you? You touched briefly on the companies that you have and the things you do, but how can people connect with you if they want to work with you?
so you can reach me if you ever want to reach me, at joe@obtainingmastery.com. That's one way. It's my email. I check it all the time. I have an author page for my book. It's called badgebarsbeyond.com. You can find me there. It also links to my personal Facebook as well. And then with some of our events that we're having coming up, you can see there's two different websites. There's obtainingmastery.com, and there's also OM, so for OM, but it's OM Center for Wellness.com. Those are our two websites. And we have a great events coming up, whether it's we have people flying in from all over or people that are local. One's Maximize Your Mindset. I believe we have an event in May, August, and October. And then our next NLP certification training, which I absolutely love, as we already know from this podcast, it's a 5 certification deal. It's July 10th to the 15th, and it's certified in NLP, hypnosis, time techniques, EFT, and life coaching. So you get 5 certifications in 6 days. I love the fact that people come in and they take it because maybe they want to increase revenue and they want to do this. Everyone always comes in, wants to make more money in terms of what they do for their area of work, which you will do. But I get excited about the shifts internally that you're going to have while going through it. It's amazing. The person you walk in is not the person you walk out as. It's amazing. And the best thing about NLP is, yes, that live course is in person in Parkland, Florida, which you can see on the website, but we also certify people on pre-recorded online as well. So you can be in Alaska and sign up and go through our NLP and get certified in those 5 different things. We have a lot going on, but everything on those websites will show you everything. And again, any questions for me at all in terms of my story, or if you think I can help you out with a loved one, or you just want to talk more, it's joe@obtainingmastery.com. And that's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we will be linking to all of Joe's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there on how you can reach him. And this has been another incredible episode. And I really hope our listeners have enjoyed this journey into overcoming failure and challenges as much as I have. It has been fantastic chatting with you on the podcast, Joe. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and for your time.
Thank you so much, Petra.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Journey podcast, please subscribe, share on social media, and leave us a 5-star review. You can find more of The Journey on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and the Journey blog. Sending you love and courage, and see you next week.